Hi, welcome back to our panel discussion. This is our concluding panel where we'll talk about kind of where we're moving in the circular economy and wrap up from our other discussions, which I hope you also take a look at. I'm here with Marty, Anne, and Justin. We've talked a lot about kind of some of the issues and opportunities within the supply chain, product design, the life cycle, as well as material choices. Can we think about kind of what has really stalled us moving towards a more sustainable materials economy?
Well, one of the key things that I see is that I'm seeing a mismatch in the absence of what I would call a green marketplace. That we're seeing people that are supplying safer materials and safer chemistries and seeing people that want to use those, companies that want to use those, but they can't find each other. And so that's been a real shift in the last 10 or 15 years that I've seen. Initially, we were really trying, like 15 years ago, we were trying to push for a greener economy, setting standards that would, start to define what a safer material or a chemical or product was. And now people are trying to put those in the marketplace, but they can't find each other.
Yeah, I'd say another couple things that have made it harder than it needs to be is that these problems are sometimes dealt with in isolation. So if you're dealing with carbon and water separate from chemistry, like you're bound to get stuck trying to weigh these trade-offs. So really looking at being willing to start further back in the design process, I think is hard for people because it takes more time, takes a greater investment of resources, but that's what's necessary to get us unstuck. Related to that is that if you are looking at current supply chains, especially when it comes to materials, is the incumbents are very large and commodified, and so the prices are very low. So whether you're talking about petroleum or plastics or anything along that line, you're fighting against industries that have been around for 100 years. They have
a lot of capital investment.
A lot of capital investment already sunk in the ground. And so when you're trying to shift, you have to think of ways that move us to the future we want, but that take advantage of some of that embedded infrastructure, because rebuilding the infrastructure is too expensive.
Yeah, I also think green chemistry needs to be taken more seriously as a field within the chemistry community. I took a lot of courses in chemistry in college and my graduate education, and not once was I mandated to take a course in how hazardous a lot of the chemicals they talk about are. So if people are more informed about how toxic chemicals are or potential impacts of the chemicals, and they're more likely to do something to change it.
That makes sense. So kind of taking advantage of these economies of scale, educating people, future chemists of the world, also understanding kind of what materials and getting into that industry. And then, Anne, what you talked about as well is thinking about how to do that matchmaking of understanding if I want to choose safer materials, what are those, what's available, what companies out there that can help provide that for me. Good. So what things do you think could be instituted beyond some of the things that we just touched on, really to make these sustainability interventions more effective, to drive us towards that circular economy? So that could be anywhere from incentives or government input, kind of what their role is. So thinking about what things could really move us towards that.
I don't know who necessarily would do this, but I think one of the key things is shifting our frame to a solutions frame. So, and scaling small examples that we have now, so something like the Berkeley Center for Green Chemistry's Greener Solutions class, where students are partnered with industry, and you take on a specific problem and try to find a solution to that, a green chemistry solution. We have to start thinking about how we'd scale something like that and what scale would look like. So how do we do that by sector, by material class? What would be a way to move that forward? I think that would make huge strides towards a circular economy and incorporating green chemistry and bringing green chemistry really into where it should be, where all chemistry is green chemistry.
I think also having less convoluted environmental regulations. In terms of biodegradability, for example, most people aren't sure what exactly that means in terms of the time scale especially, and in what environment as well, whether it's in sediment or in the ocean. I think there needs to be better standards around that, and also with recycling as well. These codes I don't think are good enough in terms of informing consumers, and often you have mixes of recyclable plastics and biodegradable plastics making something less recyclable. So I think improving and consolidating standards around environmental regulations will also help.
make it more viable.
Yeah, I think that it's happening. The good news is there's momentum going in this direction, and we look at previous shifts towards safer and more sustainable things. You don't really take steps backwards. So it's happening. The question is really of pace. So how do we make it happen more quickly? I think that we have both on the push side, demanding things from a regulatory standpoint, making sure that information is more available, that it's more standardized. And on the pull side, getting more options out there. So I think that funding is an important role, and all sorts of funding. So you need basic research funding that comes from, long terms of patient capital. You need growth capital, things that can take those ideas that are done in basic research and bring them out into the marketplace. And then you need the public markets to get involved and to really put, as was recently brought up in the discussion of how markets have performed in the McKinsey report, companies that put this front and center end up doing well. So I think it's a matter of speed. And if we align our resources with our values, we'll get there more quickly.
I think building on that idea of alignment, I think we have a lot of the pieces already there, and if we could start aligning, so for example, we have the base chemistry, green chemistry, to allow us to build on platform molecules from bio-based feedstocks. If we then choose those feedstocks to be perennial feedstocks, for example, which then pull carbon out of the atmosphere and back into the ground where it should be, and then we start linking that to the bioeconomy, which is something the USDA is looking at and still trying to get its hands around, what is the bioeconomy and how big is it? If we line those three pieces up, those are three areas that are all trying to grow simultaneously, and if we aligned them, we could all grow a whole lot faster and get to scale a lot faster.
That makes sense. So really kind of like joining efforts and continued growth in all of these spaces that are happening to drive that. So I think along those lines, what are some of the trends you see in sustainable manufacturing or even green chemistry to move towards the circular economy? Like what are some of the next big things?
Yeah, I think that the circular economy is one of the drivers that gets people excited. So circular economy, biomimicry, these are things that just make sense on a gut level. Oh, we're going to use less materials, and the materials we use are going to come from nature, and they're going to be regenerative. That makes sense at a gut level, and so that's really powerful for public and for higher decision makers. The reality is green chemistry then comes in when you want to choose those materials. So I think part of it is recognizing, just like Anne said, that we're all on the same team here, and that the message might resonate more to one stakeholder group or another, but that our end goals are the same.
Yeah, I think labeling programs like Safer Choice will help as well. When you start labeling products as achieving a certain standard, consumers will like that, and then they'll start coming up on shelves more, and so there will be a pull through industry, through consumers by that method as well.
So I think one of the other things I think about with this too is I really liked all of our panel discussions today, but really talking about actionable things you can do. I think, as you mentioned, biomimicry and circular economy, sometimes we think of the theoretical aspect of this and kind of the idea of it, but we really had good discussions around what are some things that are currently being done and what are some other opportunities and things that we can drive this even further. So actually make it where designers and engineers and chemists can be doing these things in their daily work to really drive towards that. Well, thank you all for joining us today. I think we have some time for any final comments.
If the question was what can everyone in the audience do, I think that whether you're a chemist or a designer or just a consumer, the easiest way to get involved in this is to take whatever you have in your hand and ask, what is in this and why? And do I like what's in this? And if not, what else could be there? Like that simplicity of question is enough to really start taking action, whether that actions end up being changing of standards and regulatory standpoint, or you become an entrepreneur and come up with a new way to solve that problem, or you decide that what you really want to do is go back and get a degree in chemistry and toxicology. All of those are, the entry point is just asking what is in my hand and why is it there? And we can all do that, and we need everyone to do that.
That's a really great point. Well, thank you all again for joining us for the panel. I hope you check out our other discussions. Thanks for watching.